A billionaire developer paved over the pristine peaks of Colorado to build an ultra-exclusive ski resort, fully expecting the dusty cattle ranch at the mountain's base to fold. But he made one fatal miscalculation. He didn't realize his wealthy clientele would rather shovel manure than sip champagne in his lodge. The dust never quite settled over Copper Ridge Ranch anymore. For 4 generations, the Hayes family had worked the rugged, sprawling 800 acres at the base of Mount Lambert. It was a brutal, beautiful life, governed by the seasons, the unpredictable Colorado winters, and the fluctuating price of beef. But for 32-year-old Hannah Hayes, the natural elements were no longer her greatest threat. The real danger was the constant, deafening roar of diesel engines echoing down from the tree line. 2 years ago, a massive conglomerate named Altitude Pinnacle Holdings had quietly purchased the 3,000 acres of alpine forest directly above Hannah's property. At the helm was Preston Harrington III, a real estate titan known for transforming quiet mountain towns into playgrounds for the ultra-rich. Harrington's vision was the Apex Summit Resort, a hyper-exclusive members-only ski sanctuary featuring helipads, a Michelin-starred dining room, and heated marble walkways. There was just one glaring problem with Harrington's paradise. The primary access road wound directly past the weathered fences and rusted silos of Copper Ridge Ranch. From the beginning, Harrington tried to erase Hannah. He sent his attorneys down in leased luxury SUVs, waving briefcases full of aggressively low buyout offers. When Hannah calmly pointed out that the land wasn't for sale, the offers turned into thinly veiled threats. When threats didn't work, the sabotage began. The construction phase was a waking nightmare for the ranch. Harrington's contractors seemed to deliberately schedule dynamite blasting during calving season. The concussive booms echoing off the canyon walls sent Hannah's herd into a frenzy, resulting in 3 lost calves in a single week. Heavy cement trucks tore up the county road, turning the asphalt into deeply rutted gravel that snapped the axle of Hannah's only reliable feed truck. And then came the water issue. The resort's massive snow-making machines diverted flow from Lambert Creek, reducing the vital artery that fed Hannah's lower pastures to a muddy trickle. Hannah fought back, filing grievances with the county water board, but she quickly learned how far Harrington's influence extended. The local zoning commissioner suddenly lost her paperwork. The county sheriff claimed the road damage was out of his jurisdiction. And most devastatingly, William Trent, the regional manager at First Mountain Trust, the bank that had held the Hayes family mortgage for 4 decades, called Hannah into his office to deliver a crushing blow. "I'm sorry, Hannah," William had said, refusing to meet her eyes as he slid a foreclosure warning across his pristine desk. "But the board has reviewed your margins. With the loss of your spring calves and the emergency feed you've had to import, you're too far in the red. We can't extend your line of credit through the winter. The balloon payment is due in 90 days. If you can't make it, we'll have to initiate asset seizure." Hannah had stared at the documents, her calloused hands trembling slightly. She knew exactly what was happening. Harrington had deposited millions into First Mountain Trust to finance the resort's local infrastructure. He was squeezing her out, legally and systematically. By late November, the Apex Summit Resort officially opened its doors. It was a spectacle of obscene wealth. Private jets clogged the nearest regional airport, and a fleet of black-tinted vehicles constantly ferried tech billionaires, hedge fund managers, and international socialites past Hannah's property. As they drove by, they looked out their windows at Hannah, who was usually waist-deep in mud, wrestling bales of alfalfa in the freezing wind, like she was a tragic, outdated exhibit in a museum. Hannah was exhausted, nearly bankrupt, and rapidly running out of options. She spent her nights at her kitchen table, agonizing over ledgers, surrounded by unpaid bills, while the glow of the resort's massive heated infinity pools lit up the mountain above her like a taunting second moon. Harrington had won. He had built his castle, and he was starving out the peasant at the gates. Or so he thought. The turning point didn't come from a courtroom victory or a sudden spike in cattle prices. It came wrapped in a blinding, terrifying whiteout during the first major blizzard of the season. It was a Tuesday evening in early December. The snow was falling so thick and fast that visibility was reduced to a few feet. Hannah was in the main barn, urgently tending to a first calf heifer that was struggling with a breech birth when her ranch hand, Wyatt, burst through the barn doors, covered in snow. "Boss, you gotta come see this!" Wyatt yelled over the howling wind. "There's a rig stuck in the ditch by the lower cattle guard. Looks like they slid right off the ice." Leaving the heifer for a brief moment, Hannah grabbed her heavy coat and trudged out into the storm. Down by the property line, a $200,000 imported luxury SUV was buried axle deep in a snowdrift. The engine was dead, and the hazard lights were blinking weakly. Inside, huddled in the freezing leather interior, were 4 terrified people. Hannah didn't hesitate. She fired up her heavy-duty tractor, chained it to the SUV's chassis, and hauled the massive vehicle out of the ditch and straight into her equipment shed to get the occupants out of the lethal temperatures. The driver was Jonathan Croft, the founder of a massive Silicon Valley software firm, accompanied by his wife, Olivia, a high-profile lifestyle influencer, and their 2 teenage sons. They had been en route to their $5,000 a night suite at Apex Summit when their driver misjudged the treacherous curve. "The storm knocked out the main grid, and the county plows won't be through until morning," Hannah told them bluntly as she handed out thick wool blankets. "You're stuck here. The house is warm, but I can't play host. I have a calf dying in the barn." Instead of demanding a helicopter or throwing a tantrum, Jonathan Croft did something that shocked Hannah. He asked if they could watch. Desperate and out of time, Hannah didn't argue. The Croft family followed her into the drafty, smell-heavy barn. For the next 3 hours, they didn't look at their phones. They didn't complain about the cold or the smell of manure and iodine. Instead, they watched in absolute awe as Hannah, covered in afterbirth and sweat, successfully turned the calf inside the mother and pulled it into the world. When the calf hit the straw and took its first rattling breath, Olivia Croft was weeping. Jonathan, a man who ruthlessly managed thousands of employees, was speechless. Can we help?" one of the teenage sons asked, looking at the bloody towels and the shivering newborn calf. Hannah, exhausted to her bones, handed the billionaire's son a coarse towel. "Start rubbing him down, vigorously. We need to get his circulation going." For the rest of the night, the Croft family worked. They helped Hannah bottle feed the weak calf. They hauled heavy buckets of hot water, and they shoveled out the dirty bedding. By morning, when the storm finally broke, revealing a brilliant, piercing blue sky, the Crofts were covered in dirt, smelling of livestock, and sporting blisters on their pristine hands. And they had never looked happier. Before the resort's recovery vehicle arrived to fetch them, Olivia Croft pulled out her phone and uploaded a raw, unedited video of her husband and sons wrestling a hay bale in the freezing dawn. Her caption read, "Forget the spa. Real life is happening at the bottom of the mountain. Best night of our lives at Copper Ridge Ranch." It went viral within hours. The next morning, Hannah was fixing a broken latch on the pasture gate when a sleek black car pulled up to her driveway. Two men in designer ski gear stepped out, looking wildly out of place. "Excuse me," one of them said, holding up a phone displaying Olivia Croft's post. "We're staying up at Apex. We heard this is where you can do the authentic cowboy immersion. How much for a session?" Hannah stared at them. She looked at her muddy boots, then at the towering, opulent resort on the mountain. A wildly audacious, slightly vindictive idea sparked in her mind. "It's exclusive," Hannah said, her face completely deadpan. $800 a head for the day, and you work for your lunch." The men didn't even blink. They handed her a glossy black credit card. By the end of the week, word had spread through the insulated, gossip-heavy ecosystem of the Apex Summit Resort. Wealthy people are perpetually chasing the next rare, unattainable status symbol. Anyone could buy a hot stone massage or a truffle-infused dinner, but paying a premium to do grueling, authentic manual labor on a struggling cattle ranch? That was the ultimate flex. It was grounding. It was visceral. Hannah hastily formalized the business, registering Copper Ridge Frontier Immersion. She set up a makeshift booking website, capping the guests at 10 a day to manufacture scarcity, driving the price up to $1,200 a person. The reality of the tour was brutally simple. Hannah didn't put on a show. She didn't buy gentle, petting zoo animals. She handed venture capitalists a post-hole digger and told them to repair a mile of fencing. She had runway models mucking out horse stalls. She served them whatever she was making for herself, usually a huge, unceremonious pot of beef chili with cast-iron cornbread, eaten on overturned buckets in the barn. And the guests lost their minds over it. They posted about the transformative grit of the experience. The ranch was booked solid for the next 3 months. The cash injection was massive, immediate, and completely saved Hannah from the bank's impending foreclosure. She walked into First Mountain Trust, slapped a certified check on William Trent's desk to cover the balloon payment in full, and walked out without saying a word. But up on the mountain, Preston Harrington III was not celebrating. Apex Summit was experiencing a bizarre and alarming financial leak. The resort relied heavily on afternoon revenue, guests returning from the slopes to spend exorbitant amounts on spa treatments, high-end boutique shopping, and a pre-ski dining. But suddenly, half the resort was vanishing at noon. They were skipping their $500 caviar tastings to go eat canned beans in Hannah Hayes's barn. Harrington stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse office, looking down at the ranch through a pair of high-powered binoculars. He could see a group of his most elite VIP guests laughing hysterically as they struggled to herd a group of stubborn steers through a loading chute. His face flushed dark red with rage. He had spent $50 million creating a pristine bubble of luxury, and this stubborn rancher was undermining his empire with a few shovels and a herd of smelly cattle. "Get legal on the phone," Harrington barked to his assistant, his voice trembling with fury. "I want her shut down. Call the zoning board. Call the health department. I don't care if you have to invent a code violation. That ranch is a biological hazard, and I want a padlock on her gates by Friday." The war wasn't over. In fact, it was just moving out of the pastures and into the boardroom, and Hannah Hayes was about to find out exactly how dirty a billionaire could play when his pride was bruised. The retaliation began on a bitterly cold Tuesday morning, precisely at 8 o'clock. Preston Harrington III did not send armed guards or local thugs to intimidate Hannah Hayes. He sent something far more destructive. He sent municipal clipboards. A fleet of 4 immaculate white county utility vehicles idled aggressively at the edge of the Copper Ridge driveway, their hazard lights flashing in the crisp mountain air. Out stepped a coordinated phalanx of local bureaucrats, led by Gregory Barnes, the newly appointed regional director of the County Health and Safety Commission. Barnes was accompanied by inspectors from the Zoning Board, the Environmental Protection Division, and the Department of Agriculture. Harrington had effectively weaponized the entire local government, leveraging his massive tax contributions to turn municipal codes into a loaded weapon aimed directly at Hannah's livelihood. Barnes marched up to the weathered front porch, waving a thick binder of citations before Hannah even had a chance to offer him a cup of coffee. "Hayes, we are here to execute a comprehensive site audit," Barnes declared, his voice dripping with bureaucratic condescension. "We have received numerous anonymous complaints regarding unauthorized commercial operations, biological hazards, and severe zoning violations occurring on this property. Until this audit is complete, your so-called frontier immersion business is suspended." For the next 4 hours, the inspectors swarmed the ranch like locusts. They measured the distance between the barn and the property line. They took soil samples near the cattle pens. They cited her for storing diesel fuel too close to the tractor shed, for lacking commercial-grade pasteurization equipment in the kitchen, and for failing to install illuminated emergency exit signs in a barn that had stood since 1920. The fines were compounding by the minute, quickly tallying up to a sum that would bankrupt her all over again. Hannah followed them, her jaw clenched, trying to argue that agricultural exemption laws protected her, but Barnes merely smiled a thin, predatory smile. He knew the law. He also knew who paid his salary. But Harrington's brilliant legal ambush possessed one fatal flaw. He failed to account for the specific identities of the people currently mucking out Hannah's horse stalls. Down in the lower paddock, ankle-deep in mud and manure, was a man named William Kensington. William Kensington was not just a wealthy tourist seeking a rustic thrill. He was a senior managing partner at Kensington, Roth and Associates, one of the most feared and ruthless corporate litigation firms on Wall Street. He had come to the ranch to escape the crushing pressure of high-stakes mergers, finding a bizarre sense of peace in the repetitive, mindless labor of repairing barbed wire fences. When Kensington saw Hannah looking distressed on the porch, surrounded by county officials, he dropped his post-hole digger, wiped his filthy hands on his denim jeans, and marched up the hill. He didn't bother changing out of his mud-caked boots. He simply adjusted his designer glasses and stepped between Hannah and the lead inspector. "May I ask what statutory authority you are invoking to conduct a commercial safety audit on private agricultural land?" Kensington asked, his voice suddenly shifting from relaxed vacationer to a razor-sharp legal predator. Barnes scoffed, looking the muddy man up and down. "This is official county business. Step aside, sir, or I'll have you cited for obstruction." Kensington laughed, a cold, humorless sound. He pulled a sleek, waterproof phone from his pocket. "Fascinating, because according to the state's Right to Farm Act, Chapter 42, Section 7, working ranches are strictly exempt from commercial zoning restrictions, provided the primary revenue remains agricultural. Furthermore, since these guests are legally classified as volunteer farmhands trading labor for experience, there is no commercial hospitality violation. Now, I am going to call the State Attorney General, whom I happen to play squash with on alternating Thursdays, and we are going to discuss why county resources are being utilized to conduct a targeted, bad faith harassment campaign on behalf of Altitude Pinnacle Holdings." The color drained from Barnes's face. The other inspectors suddenly looked very interested in their boots. Within 15 minutes, the county vehicles were driving away, taking their binder of fraudulent citations with them. The bureaucratic siege had been broken not by Hannah, but by the very billionaires Harrington had brought to the mountain. Up in his penthouse suite, Harrington was apoplectic. He threw a crystal whiskey decanter against the reinforced glass of his office window when he received the phone call about the failed inspection. The legal route was completely blocked by the elite clientele he desperately relied upon. If he sued Hannah, he would effectively be suing his own target demographic. He needed a different, far more ruthless strategy. If he could not shut her down legally, he would choke her out logistically. Over the next 2 weeks, Harrington initiated a shadow war against Copper Ridge Ranch. He utilized his massive corporate buying power to quietly purchase exclusive regional contracts with the 3 primary agricultural suppliers in the valley. When Hannah called her usual vendor to order winter alfalfa, she was politely informed that the entire stock had been pre-purchased by a subsidiary of Apex Summit for erosion control. When she tried to schedule a bulk diesel delivery to keep her tractors running through the January freeze, the distributor claimed they were contractually obligated to service the ski resort's snowcats first, leaving her at the very bottom of a non-existent waiting list. Harrington was systematically starving her operation. The cattle needed immense amounts of calories to survive the sub-zero temperatures, and the tractors needed fuel to plow paths through the snowdrifts so the animals could reach the water troughs. Without feed and fuel, the ranch would collapse within days, regardless of how many wealthy tourists paid to shovel manure. It was a brutal, medieval siege tactic applied to modern agriculture. Hannah stood in her empty grain silo, listening to the wind howl outside, feeling a creeping sense of genuine despair. She had beaten the bank, she had beaten the inspectors, but she could not conjure hay out of thin air. She walked back into the main farmhouse, where a new group of 6 executive guests were eating breakfast, preparing for their morning chores. "I'm sorry," Hannah told them, her voice cracking just a fraction. "I have to cancel the immersion program. I have to issue your refunds. I can't get feed for the herd. The resort bought it all. If I don't figure out how to keep these animals alive by tomorrow, there won't be a ranch left to visit." The guests stopped eating. Among them was Eleanor Hughes, the chief logistics officer for a massive global shipping conglomerate. She slowly set down her coffee mug. She looked at the other guests, a venture capitalist, a tech founder, and a real estate developer from Chicago. "He bought the local supply?" Eleanor asked, her eyes narrowing with competitive intensity. "Everything within 100 miles, Hannah replied defeatedly. Eleanor pulled out her laptop. "Hannah, you don't understand how people in our tax bracket operate. Harrington thinks he has a monopoly because he bought the local feed store. That's adorable. Give me 20 minutes. What happened next was a display of raw, unrestrained capitalist power repurposed for agricultural salvation. Eleanor made 3 phone calls. The tech founder wired a blank check to a transportation logistics hub in Nebraska. The venture capitalist called a favor from a private freight railway executive. 36 hours later, the ground beneath Copper Ridge Ranch began to vibrate. Harrington, looking down from his resort, expected to see Hannah's cattle dropping from starvation. Instead, he watched in absolute horror as a convoy of 10 massive, heavy-duty flatbed trucks, escorted by private security vehicles, rolled past the resort's entrance and turned into the ranch. They were carrying hundreds of tons of premium, high-yield alfalfa, imported directly from a massive commercial farm in the Midwest, fully paid for by Hannah's guests. Following the hay trucks were 2 independent fuel tankers, secured by Eleanor's logistics network, pumping thousands of gallons of winter blend diesel directly into Hannah's reserves. Harrington had tried to cut off her air supply, and in response the most powerful people in the country had built her a customized life support system. The war had escalated beyond anything Harrington could control, and the mountain itself was about to intercede. Driven to the edge of madness by his inability to crush a single female rancher, Preston Harrington III made a catastrophic, hubristic decision. If he couldn't force Hannah out, he would expand his resort's footprint so aggressively that her property value would plummet under the shadow of his development. He fast-tracked the construction of the Diamond Plunge, a massive, dangerously steep ski run designed to appeal to extreme winter sports enthusiasts. The problem was the geography. To create the run, Harrington's engineers had to clear-cut hundreds of acres of ancient pine forest on the steep incline directly above the main access road. Independent environmental surveyors had warned him against the aggressive logging, citing that the deep root systems of the trees were the only things anchoring the fragile topsoil to the bedrock. Harrington, blinded by ego and surrounded by yes-men, completely ignored the warnings, bribing the right county officials to expedite the logging permits. By late February, the mountainside was stripped bare, a glaring scar of exposed earth and loose rock waiting for the snow. The winter had been unusually volatile, characterized by heavy snowfall followed by sudden, unnatural spikes in temperature. In the first week of March, a freak weather system stalled over Mount Lambert. It wasn't a blizzard. It was a torrential, relentless atmospheric river of warm rain, falling directly onto 6 feet of packed alpine snow. Hydrologists call it a rain-on snow event, and it is the absolute worst-case scenario for mountain stability. The warm rain rapidly melted the snowpack, sending millions of gallons of water rushing down the bare, defenseless slopes of the newly cleared Diamond Plunge. Without the trees to absorb the water or hold the earth together, the soil completely liquefied. At 2 a.m. on a Thursday, the mountain finally surrendered. It sounded like a fleet of freight trains crashing through the valley. A colossal debris flow, a lethal mixture of liquid mud, massive boulders, and uprooted tree trunks, surged down the slope. It completely bypassed Copper Ridge Ranch, which was protected by a natural granite ridge, and slammed directly into the primary access road of the Apex Summit Resort. The mudslide wiped out a half-mile stretch of the highway, swallowing the luxury entrance gates and instantly severing the main underground power lines and fiber-optic cables that fed the resort. The backup generators, situated improperly in the lower maintenance levels, were flooded with freezing mud within minutes. Suddenly, the 5-star, ultra-exclusive Apex Summit Resort was plunged into total darkness and freezing temperatures. 200 elite guests, accustomed to heated floors and concierge service, were trapped in a rapidly freezing building with no heat, no water, and no way out. The county emergency services were overwhelmed by the regional flooding, and the State Highway Patrol declared the road entirely impassable for at least 48 hours. Helicopters were grounded due to the violent storm winds. Up in his freezing penthouse, Harrington stared into the pitch-black night, his empire crumbling around him. The temperature in the Grand Lodge was dropping fast. Panic was setting in among the guests. He was completely, utterly powerless. Down in the valley, Hannah Hayes stood on her porch, wrapped in a thick wool coat, holding a flashlight. Her ranch, powered by independent diesel generators, fueled by Eleanor's imported reserves, was fully operational and warmly lit. Wyatt walked up beside her, looking at the dark, silent monolith of the resort up the mountain. "They're cut off," Wyatt said grimly. "Road's gone. Power's dead. It's gonna hit single digits up there by dawn. Hannah looked at the tractors in her shed. They were equipped with massive plows, tire chains thick as a man's wrist, and enough torque to pull a house off its foundation. She looked back at the dark resort. Preston Harrington had tried to destroy her life, steal her land, and starve her animals. He deserved to freeze in the dark. But Hannah was a rancher. You don't let livestock freeze, and you certainly don't let people die, no matter how much you hate them. "Wake up the guests," Hannah ordered Wyatt, her voice slicing through the wind. "Tell them to put their boots on. We're going up the mountain." It was the most surreal rescue operation in Colorado history. Hannah drove the lead heavy-duty tractor, its massive plow blade slowly carving a precarious path through the edges of the mudslide, pushing aside debris just enough to allow passage. Behind her trailed a fleet of off-road farm vehicles, driven by her ranch hands and her billionaire tourists, dragging heavy flatbed trailers outfitted with hay bales and heavy wool horse blankets. They reached the resort just as the sun began to rise over the devastated landscape. The pristine glass doors of the Apex Lodge were smashed, the lobby floor covered in mud. The guests, wrapped in expensive but useless designer coats, were shivering in the darkness, terrified. When the heavy diesel engine of Hannah's tractor roared into the courtyard, it was like the arrival of the cavalry. Hannah kicked open the cab door and stepped out. Harrington emerged from the crowd, looking disheveled, pale, and thoroughly defeated. Hannah didn't even look at him. She turned to the shivering crowd of millionaires. "Climb onto the trailers, wrap up in the blankets. We're taking you down to the ranch. We have heat, hot coffee, and chili on the stove." The evacuation took hours. The pampered guests of Apex Summit eagerly piled onto the muddy trailers, huddling together for warmth, profoundly grateful for the rescue. Harrington was the last one to leave the lobby. He stood at the edge of the mud, looking up at Hannah. He opened his mouth to speak, perhaps to thank her, perhaps to offer a hollow apology. Hannah cut him off. "Get on the trailer, Preston, or freeze. I really don't care." He climbed on silently. The fallout from the mudslide was catastrophic for Altitude Pinnacle Holdings. State environmental investigators immediately traced the cause of the disaster directly to the illegal clear-cutting on the Diamond Plunge. The EPA stepped in with massive federal fines. The county, finally free from Harrington's financial grip, revoked the resort's operational permits, citing criminal negligence. Facing dozens of class-action lawsuits from furious, traumatized guests, Altitude Pinnacle Holdings filed for Chapter 11. Bankruptcy by the end of the spring, the resort was abandoned, a colossal, empty monument to corporate arrogance slowly being reclaimed by the mountain. Its assets were liquidated at pennies on the dollar. Hannah Hayes, backed by a consortium of her most loyal, high-net-worth guests who had formed a private investment group, purchased the entire 3,000-acre alpine tract at the bankruptcy auction. She didn't buy it to expand her ranch. She immediately transferred the title to a permanent state land trust, placing a strict, unbreakable conservation easement on the entire mountain. The forest would grow back, the watershed would heal, and no developer would ever touch Mount Lambert again. Copper Ridge Frontier Immersion continued to thrive, permanently booked years in advance. It remained grueling, authentic, and brutally real. Hannah still woke up before dawn. She still wrestled calves in the mud, and she still fought the harsh Colorado winters. But she did it on her own terms, under the shadow of a mountain she had saved, watching the most powerful people in the world pay for the privilege of learning how to survive in hers, What an unbelievable journey. From fighting off aggressive billionaires to turning grueling ranch chores into a high-end luxury attraction, Hannah's story proves that sometimes the best way to beat the system is to completely rewrite the rules. If you loved hearing how this fierce rancher stood her ground and saved her legacy, hit that like button. Share this video with someone who loves a great underdog story. And don't forget to subscribe for more incredible real-life dramas.